Every family has that one father who never gave up on an impossible dream. Jack Morrison was that father, spending 20 years in his garage working on a broken Formula One car that his children called worthless junk. They laughed at the rusted machine and called it Dad's expensive hobby. When Jack died quietly one winter morning, his son Michael came home to sell everything. But he found a hidden compartment in the old car. Inside were letters, blueprints, and a championship medallion from racing legend Alessandro Romano. Romano vanished in 1974, along with millions in stolen racing technology. The broken car wasn't worthless. It was Romano's lost masterpiece, worth over $100 million. It carried secrets that powerful people had killed to protect. How did a small-town mechanic end up with the most valuable stolen car in racing history? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The February wind cut through Michael Morrison's overcoat as he stood before his childhood home, a modest two-story house that seemed smaller than he remembered. 3 days had passed since Jack's funeral, and the weight of unfinished business pressed against his chest like a stone. At 42, Michael had built a successful consulting firm in Chicago, wore tailored suits, and lived in a downtown apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows. Coming back to Millfield felt like stepping backward through time. The house sat on a corner lot where Maple Street met the old county road, its white paint peeling in strips that curled like autumn leaves. Jack had always meant to repaint it, Michael remembered. Always next spring, next summer, when business picked up at the garage. But seasons had turned into years, and Jack's hands had grown more interested in carburetors than paintbrushes. Michael pulled the worn brass keys from his pocket, the same keys Jack had carried for 23 years. The metal felt warm despite the cold, polished smooth by decades of his father's calloused fingers. He'd found them on Jack's nightstand beside a half-empty coffee cup and a dog-eared copy of Racing Legends magazine. Even in death, his father's obsessions had surrounded him. The front door opened with a familiar creak, and the smell hit him immediately. Motor oil, cigarettes, and something else, the faint aroma of his mother's lavender sachets, still lingering in the hallway closet after all these years. Margaret Morrison had died when Michael was 19, but her presence remained woven into the fabric of this place, like a ghost made of memory and regret. "You made it," Sarah's voice came from the kitchen, tired but warm. His sister had driven down from Minneapolis the night before, her own life on hold to help sort through the remnants of their father's world. At 38, Sarah had inherited their mother's practical nature and their father's stubborn streak, a combination that made her formidable in her work as a nurse, but exhausting in family matters. Michael found her at the kitchen table, surrounded by manila folders and legal documents. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she wore one of their father's old flannel shirts over her jeans. She looked like she hadn't slept much. "Coffee?" she offered, gesturing toward an old percolator on the counter. "Please." Michael sat across from her, noting the familiar chips in the Formica table, the same breakfast nook where they'd eaten countless bowls of cereal before school. "How bad is it?" Sarah pushed a folder toward him. "Better than I expected, actually. The house is paid off, thanks to Mom's life insurance. There's about $8,000 in checking, another $12,000 in savings. The garage property is worth maybe $40,000 if we can find a buyer." Michael opened the folder and scanned the documents. Jack Morrison's entire life, reduced to bank statements and property assessments. What about debts? Surprisingly few. Dad was careful with money, just spent it all in the wrong place. She gestured toward the back of the house, where the garage stood like a monument to misplaced priorities. 20 years of car parts, tools, racing magazines. I swear he subscribed to every automotive publication ever printed. Through the kitchen window, Michael could see the garage that had consumed so much of his father's attention. The building was larger than the house, a converted barn that Jack had insulated and equipped with hydraulic lifts, welding equipment, and enough tools to service a small fleet. During Michael's teenage years, he'd resented every dollar spent on that place, money that could have gone toward college funds or family vacations or any of the normal things other families seem to afford. "Have you been out there yet?" Michael asked. Sarah shook her head. "I looked through the window yesterday, but I couldn't bring myself to go inside. It's going to take weeks to sort through everything. Maybe we should just call an estate sale company, let them deal with it." The practical solution, Michael knew. Clean, efficient, final. But something made him hesitate. "What's the rush? The funeral was 3 days ago." "The rush is that I have a life to get back to, and so do you. Dad's gone, Michael. All this stuff." She waved her hand toward the garage. "It's just stuff now. It doesn't mean anything anymore." Michael poured coffee from the percolator, the bitter liquid burning his tongue. Sarah was right, of course. Jack's death had transformed his possessions into mere objects, stripped of the passion that had given them meaning. But Michael couldn't shake the feeling that disposing of everything so quickly would be like erasing his father entirely. "I know you think I'm being sentimental," Sarah continued, "but staying here longer won't bring him back. It won't make the relationship you never had with him." The words stung because they were true. Michael and Jack had been strangers living in the same house for most of Michael's childhood, connected by blood, but separated by vastly different dreams. Jack had wanted to share his love of engines and racing, while Michael had craved books, academic achievement, and escape from Millfield's limitations. The gulf between them had widened with each passing year until Michael left for college and rarely returned. "I'm not trying to resurrect anything," Michael said carefully. "I just think we should be thorough, make sure we're not missing something important." Sarah studied her brother's face, searching for the real motivation behind his reluctance. "What are you hoping to find out there? Dad's greatest hits? Some hidden treasure?" Michael almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Hidden treasure in Jack Morrison's garage, as if 20 years of financial struggle could have concealed some secret windfall. "I don't know what I'm hoping to find. Maybe just some understanding of what drove him all these years." "I can tell you what drove him," Sarah said, her voice hardening. "Delusion. The same delusion that kept him working on that stupid race car while Mom was dying, while we were struggling to pay for her treatments. The same delusion that made him think he was going to be somebody special instead of just being a good father to the kids he already had." The old anger was still there, Michael realized. Sarah had never forgiven Jack for his priorities, for choosing dreams over responsibilities. She'd been the one to stay close after their mother died, the one to check on their father and worry about his loneliness. Michael had sent checks from Chicago and called on holidays, but Sarah had lived with the daily reality of Jack's obsessions. "Maybe we're both right," Michael said finally. "Maybe it was delusion, but maybe there's still something worth understanding about why he needed those delusions." Sarah sighed and rubbed her temples. "Fine, but I'm not spending the next month sorting through 40 years of Motor Trend magazines and rusty wrenches. If you want to play archaeologist, that's your choice. I'll handle the house, you take the garage." They finished their coffee in relative silence, each lost in their own memories of the man who had brought them back to this kitchen table. Outside, the February afternoon was fading toward evening, casting long shadows across the yard. Soon, Michael would have to face the garage and everything it contained, not just the physical objects, but the emotional weight of his father's unfulfilled dreams. After Sarah went upstairs to sort through bedroom closets, Michael stood at the kitchen sink and looked out at the garage. From this angle, he could see the small windows along the side wall, most of them covered with old newspapers and racing posters. Jack had always said he needed better lighting in there, but had never gotten around to installing new fixtures. Like so many of his plans, it had remained a someday project. The keys felt heavier in Michael's pocket as he contemplated the walk across the yard. 23 years of accumulated dreams and disappointments waited behind that door, along with the centerpiece of Jack's obsession, the 1974 Formula One car that had consumed so much time, money, and hope. Michael had seen it countless times during his youth, always in various states of disassembly, always promising to run again someday. As a teenager, he'd been embarrassed by it. Friends would come over and stare at the exotic shape under its tattered car cover, asking questions Michael couldn't answer. Why did his dad have a race car? Where had it come from? Would it ever run? Michael had learned to deflect these inquiries with shrugs and subject changes, treating his father's prized possession like a family secret too shameful to explain. Now, approaching middle age himself, Michael wondered if he'd been too harsh in his judgment. Perhaps Jack's dreams hadn't been delusions after all, but simply the kind of hope that keeps a man's spirit alive when life offers few other rewards. Perhaps the garage wasn't a monument to foolishness, but a testament to the human need to believe in something greater than immediate circumstances. The phone rang, interrupting his reverie. Sarah answered from upstairs, her voice carrying down through the old house's thin walls. Michael couldn't make out the words, but her tone suggested business, probably the lawyer, or the insurance company, or one of the dozen other people they'd need to contact in the coming days. Death, Michael had learned, generated enormous amounts of paperwork. He pulled on his coat and stepped outside, keys jingling in his hand. The gravel crunched under his feet as he walked the familiar path to the garage, the same route he'd taken thousands of times as a child. But tonight felt different, final somehow, as if he were walking toward the end of something rather than just another visit to his father's workshop. The garage door was secured with a heavy padlock, its brass surface green with age. Michael tried 3 different keys before finding the right one, the mechanism turning with surprising smoothness. Jack had maintained his locks better than his paint job, apparently. As the door swung open, Michael reached for the light switch he remembered from decades past. The fluorescent fixtures flickered to life, revealing a space that was both exactly as he'd remembered and somehow different. More organized than he'd expected, cleaner than a working garage had any right to be. Tools hung in precise arrangements on pegboard walls, workbenches were clear of debris, and the concrete floor showed fresh oil stains only around the hydraulic lift. And there, in the center of it all, sat the race car. The Formula One machine crouched low and predatory under a clean canvas cover, its outline suggesting speed even at rest. Michael had expected to find it in the same condition he'd last seen it, half assembled, surrounded by boxes of parts, more sculpture than vehicle. But something about its positioning, the careful way the cover was draped, suggested completion rather than abandonment. He approached slowly, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. The car seemed larger than he remembered, its presence filling the garage with an almost tangible energy. When he reached for the cover, his hands trembled slightly from cold. He told himself, though the garage was surprisingly warm. The cover came away easily, and Michael stepped back to take in the full sight of his father's obsession. The car was beautiful. Not the rust-eaten hulk he'd expected, but a gleaming machine that looked ready to race. The bodywork shone with fresh paint in deep red and gold, the sponsor decals crisp and bright as if applied yesterday. Chrome exhaust pipes curved from the engine bay like metallic serpents, and the cockpit was fitted with racing seats that looked both vintage and immaculate. Michael walked around the car slowly, noting details that spoke of meticulous craftsmanship. The wheel rims were polished to mirror brightness, the suspension components showed no rust or wear, and the engine, visible through an open access panel, appeared to be completely rebuilt. This wasn't the abandoned project of his memories, but a completed masterpiece that someone had poured their heart into, someone who'd known what they were doing. On a nearby workbench, Michael found a leather-bound notebook filled with his father's careful handwriting, page after page of notes, measurements, parts lists, and sketches. The writing was different from the shaky scrawl he'd seen on birthday cards in recent years. This was precise, technical, the work of someone documenting every detail of a complex restoration. As he flipped through the pages, certain phrases caught his attention. Romano specifications appeared frequently, along with references to original blueprints and authentication documents. Michael had never heard his father mention anyone named Romano, but the name appeared throughout the notebook as if it were the key to everything. The final entry was dated just 3 weeks before Jack's death. "M will understand someday. The truth is all here, waiting for him to find it. I just hope I've left enough clues." Michael closed the notebook and looked back at the race car, seeing it now not as a monument to wasted dreams, but as a puzzle his father had spent 20 years solving. Every restored component, every careful note, every gleaming surface was part of a larger story that Jack had never shared with his family. A story that, apparently, he'd hoped Michael would discover for himself. Michael spent the next morning in the garage, methodically photographing everything for insurance purposes. Sarah had suggested they document the contents before calling estate sale companies, though Michael suspected his real motivation went deeper than paperwork. Something about his father's final notebook entry nagged at him, the suggestion that truth was hidden here, waiting to be discovered. The race car dominated the space, but the garage contained decades of automotive history. Shelves lined the walls, filled with parts catalogs, technical manuals, and racing magazines dating back to the 1970s. Jack had organized everything with surprising precision, each section labeled in his careful handwriting: suspension components, electrical systems, historical documentation. It was in the historical documentation section that Michael found the first real surprise. Behind a row of racing yearbooks, his fingers touched something unexpected, a metal edge that didn't belong. When he pulled the books forward, he discovered a narrow gap between the shelving unit and the wall. The gap was just wide enough for a thin metal box, painted the same grey as the garage walls, to blend invisibly into the background. Michael worked the box free, his heart racing with the thrill of discovery. The container was about the size of a briefcase, secured with a small combination lock. 3 numbers, worn smooth by repeated use. Michael tried the obvious combinations: first Jack's birthday, their mother's birthday, the year of Jack's birth. Nothing worked. Frustrated, he set the box on the workbench and returned to his photography. But his eyes kept drifting back to the mysterious container. What was important enough for Jack to hide, but accessible enough to require regular opening? The lock showed signs of frequent use, suggesting Jack had accessed whatever was inside many times over the years. As he worked, Michael noticed other oddities in the garage's organization. Certain tools were duplicates: 2 complete socket sets, 2 welding torches, 2 hydraulic jacks. Some appeared well used, while others looked almost new. Racing magazines were sorted not just by date, but by specific topics. Some stacks focused on engine technology, others on famous drivers, still others on racing scandals and controversies from the 1970s. The methodical nature of it all suggested research rather than casual reading. Jack hadn't just been a racing fan, he'd been studying something specific, building toward some particular understanding. Michael photographed the locked box from several angles, then returned his attention to the race car itself. Walking around the vehicle again, he noticed details that had escaped him the previous evening. The paint wasn't just fresh, it was period correct, down to the specific shade of red used by racing teams in the early 1970s. The sponsor decals were authentic reproductions of companies that had supported Formula One racing 50 years ago. Someone had restored this car not just to working condition, but to exact historical accuracy. Kneeling beside the driver's side, Michael examined the cockpit more closely. The racing seat was secured with modern safety harnesses, but the dashboard and controls appeared completely original. Toggle switches, analog gauges, and a steering wheel worn smooth by use, or perhaps careful restoration to suggest use. It was then that he noticed something odd about the seat mounting. The bolts securing the seat to the chassis didn't match the others visible throughout the car. While the rest of the restoration used period-appropriate fasteners, these bolts were modern stainless steel, as if the seat had been removed and reinstalled recently. Michael tried to lift the seat, testing whether it might be loose. To his surprise, the entire assembly shifted slightly, revealing that it wasn't fully secured. With careful pressure, he was able to lift the seat enough to see underneath. There, mounted to the chassis beneath the driver's position, was a rectangular panel that looked like it belonged in a bank vault rather than a race car. Heavy steel, with a mechanical lock that required a key rather than a combination. And attached to the panel with a small chain was a brass key that looked suspiciously familiar. Michael pulled out his father's key ring and examined each key carefully. Most were obviously for doors, locks, and equipment around the garage, but one, a small brass key with unusual markings, looked like it might fit the panel under the seat. His hands shook as he inserted the key into the lock. It turned smoothly, and the panel swung open on hidden hinges. Inside was a compartment about the size of a shoebox, lined with felt and containing several items that made Michael's breath catch in his throat. First, a small stack of letters tied with a faded red ribbon. The envelopes were addressed in elegant handwriting to Jack Morrison, trusted friend, with return addresses from various European cities, Monaco, Milan, Barcelona. Beneath the letters, wrapped in protective cloth, was a circular medallion about the size of a silver dollar. Even in the fluorescent lighting of the garage, it gleamed with the unmistakable luster of gold. Engraved on one side was the image of a racing car in full speed, wheels barely touching the ground. Around the edge, words in Italian, Campione del Mondo, 1973. World Champion 1973. Michael turned the medallion over and found an inscription in English. To Alessandro Romano, for excellence beyond measure. Formula One World Championship 1973. Alessandro Romano. The name from his father's notebook, now connected to a championship medallion hidden in a secret compartment of a supposedly worthless race car. Michael's mind raced through the implications. If this medallion was authentic and the weight and craftsmanship suggested it was, then it belonged to a Formula One world champion from 1973. But Michael knew enough racing history to be certain that no one named Alessandro Romano had won the world championship in 1973. That honor had gone to Jackie Stewart, driving for Tyrrell. So who was Alessandro Romano? And why did his championship medallion rest in a secret compartment of Jack Morrison's race car? Michael untied the ribbon, securing the letters, and opened the first envelope. The paper was expensive, cream-colored with a slight texture that spoke of quality. The handwriting was the same elegant script from the envelope addresses. My dear Jack, the letter began, dated June 15, 1974. I hope this letter finds you well, and that the burden I have placed upon you has not grown too heavy. The car is more than I ever dared hope for, not just the machine itself, but the promise it represents. In your hands, I know it will survive until the world is ready to hear our story. Michael read the letter twice, then reached for the second envelope. Each letter revealed pieces of a larger puzzle, references to the theft and those who would silence the truth, mentions of revolutionary technology and proof that will vindicate us both. And running through every letter, a deep affection and trust between Romano and Jack that spoke of a friendship forged under extraordinary circumstances. The final letter, dated December 1974, was shorter and more urgent. Jack, they are closing in. The technology must be protected at all costs. If something happens to me, remember our agreement. The car holds the truth. When the time is right, the world will understand what we accomplished together. Until then, Guard it well, my friend. The future of racing depends on it. A.R. Michael sat back on his heels, the letters scattered around him and the golden medallion heavy in his palm. His father hadn't been restoring just any old race car, he'd been guardian to something that Alessandro Romano considered vital to the future of racing, something worth hiding for 50 years. But what had happened to Alessandro Romano? The letters suggested he'd been in danger in 1974, possibly from people who wanted to steal some kind of revolutionary technology. Had he escaped, been captured, disappeared entirely? Michael stood and walked around the race car again, seeing it now not as his father's hobby, but as a historical artifact. If Romano had been developing revolutionary technology in 1974, and if that technology was somehow connected to this car, then Jack Morrison had spent 20 years not just restoring a vehicle, but preserving a piece of racing history that someone had tried to destroy. The weight of responsibility settled on Michael's shoulders. His father had carried this secret for decades, maintaining Romano's trust through careful restoration and absolute silence. Now Jack was gone, and the burden had passed to Michael whether he wanted it or not. Outside, he could hear Sarah calling his name from the house. Quickly, he returned the letters and medallion to their hiding place, secured the panel, and repositioned the seat. Whatever this mystery involved, he needed time to understand it fully before sharing it with anyone else, even Sarah. But as he walked back toward the house, Michael felt the beginnings of something he hadn't experienced in years: genuine respect for his father. Jack Morrison might have seemed like a simple small-town mechanic to his family and neighbors, but he'd been entrusted with something extraordinary. And judging by the pristine condition of the race car, he'd honored that trust completely. The question now was whether Michael had the courage and wisdom to do the same. That evening, Michael sat in his father's study with a laptop and a growing sense of unease. Sarah had gone to bed early, exhausted from sorting through closets full of their mother's clothes and their father's personal effects. The house felt different at night, smaller somehow, filled with the settling sounds of old wood and distant memories. Michael had spent 3 hours researching Alessandro Romano online, and the results were deeply troubling. According to every official Formula One record he could find, no driver named Alessandro Romano had ever competed in the World Championship. The 1973 season had been dominated by Jackie Stewart, Emerson Fittipaldi, and Ronnie Peterson. Romano's name appeared nowhere in the historical record. Yet the medallion hidden in the race car was undeniably authentic. The weight, the craftsmanship, the patina of age, everything suggested it was genuine. Either Michael had stumbled upon an elaborate hoax that had fooled his father for 20 years, or something in the official racing records was deliberately incomplete. He tried searching for Romano in broader terms: Italian racing drivers, Formula One test drivers, automotive engineers. Still nothing. It was as if Alessandro Romano had been systematically erased from racing history, leaving only the letters and medallion as proof he'd ever existed. The letters themselves raised more questions than they answered. Romano's references to the theft and revolutionary technology suggested he'd been involved in some kind of industrial espionage or technological breakthrough. But Formula One in the 1970s had been a relatively primitive sport compared to modern standards. What kind of technology could have been revolutionary enough to justify a 50-year cover-up? Michael opened his father's notebook again, studying the technical drawings scattered throughout. Jack's handwriting described engine modifications, aerodynamic improvements, and suspension adjustments that seemed advanced even by today's standards. Some of the concepts wouldn't become common in Formula One until decades later. It was past midnight when Michael finally found a lead. Buried deep in a Formula One forum discussion about lost drivers and forgotten scandals, a user named Vintage Racer 47 had posted about rumors of a covered-up incident in 1974. "My grandfather worked for Ferrari in the 70s, the post read. He always claimed there was a driver who developed revolutionary engine technology but got erased from the records after some kind of scandal. Said the technology was stolen and the driver disappeared. Grandfather took it to his grave, but he swore it was true." Michael clicked on Vintage Racer 47's profile and found dozens of posts about obscure racing history, technical innovations, and unsolved mysteries from Formula One's past. This wasn't a casual fan, but someone with deep knowledge of the sport's hidden corners. After some hesitation, Michael composed a private message. "I'm researching a possible connection between a 1974 Formula One scandal and a driver named Alessandro Romano. My father recently passed away and left some materials that might be related. Would you be willing to discuss this privately?" He sent the message and immediately regretted it. What if Vintage Racer 47 was connected to whoever had tried to silence Romano? What if Michael was walking into the same danger that had forced Romano into hiding? But within minutes, a reply appeared. "Alessandro Romano. I haven't heard that name in 40 years. Your father was he Jack Morrison from Millfield? If so, we need to talk. Tomorrow, if possible. This isn't something for online discussion." Michael stared at the screen, his heart pounding. Vintage Racer 47 knew his father's name, knew about Millfield. This wasn't a coincidence, it was confirmation that Jack Morrison had been part of something much larger than a simple car restoration. The next morning, Michael drove to the coffee shop Vintage Racer 47 had suggested, a small place called Elena's Cafe in the neighboring town of Riverside. He'd told Sarah he was meeting with an insurance adjuster about the garage contents, a lie that felt increasingly necessary as the mystery deepened. He recognized Dr. Elena Vasquez immediately from her profile description, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She was sitting in a corner booth, a stack of old racing magazines on the table beside her coffee cup. "Michael Morrison," she said as he approached, not a question but a statement of fact. "You look like your father, but with your mother's eyes." Margaret had beautiful eyes. Michael sat across from her, startled. "You knew my parents?" "I knew your father, years ago. Before you were born, actually. We worked together briefly in the early 1970s. Dr. Vasquez smiled sadly. "Jack was one of the most talented mechanics I ever met, also one of the most honorable men. I was sorry to hear about his passing." "Worked together where?" "European racing circuits. I was a young engineer then, working for various teams as a technical consultant. Jack was freelancing, one of those gifted Americans who could make any car faster just by listening to its engine. We crossed paths several times, but our real collaboration came in 1974. Dr. Vasquez opened one of the racing magazines and pointed to a photograph of a Formula One paddock. "That's your father," she said, indicating a young man in coveralls working on an engine. "And that," she pointed to another figure in the background, "is Alessandro Romano." Michael studied the photograph carefully. The man Dr. Vasquez identified as Romano was tall and lean, with dark hair and an intense expression. He was watching Jack work, and something in his posture suggested deep concentration and respect. "Romano was different from the other drivers," Dr. Vasquez continued. "Most were wealthy playboys or established professionals. Alessandro came from nowhere, a small town in northern Italy, family of clockmakers. But he had an intuitive understanding of racing technology that was decades ahead of his time. The official records don't show him competing in Formula One. Because he never got the chance." Dr. Vasquez's expression darkened. "Alessandro developed engine technology that would have revolutionized racing. fuel injection systems, aerodynamic principles, suspension designs that wouldn't become standard until the 1990s. He was going to debut in the 1974 season with his own team, using engines based on his innovations. What happened? The night before his first scheduled race, everything was stolen. Not just the car, but all the technical drawings, prototypes, research notes, everything. The theft was so complete and professional that it had to be an inside job, someone with access to the garage and detailed knowledge of what to take. Michael felt a chill. Who would do that? Established manufacturers who couldn't afford to be made obsolete by an unknown driver with revolutionary ideas. In 1974, Formula One was dominated by British and Italian teams with enormous investments in existing technology. Alessandro's innovations would have made all of that worthless overnight. Dr. Vasquez pulled out another photograph. This one showing a race car that looked remarkably similar to the one sitting in Jack's garage. This was Alessandro's prototype. The only car built using his technology. It disappeared the same night as everything else. But if everything was stolen, how did my father? Your father was Alessandro's chief mechanic and only real friend in the racing world. Alessandro trusted him completely, and Jack proved worthy of that trust. When Alessandro realized the theft was imminent, he secretly moved the car to a safe location and asked Jack to guard it until the truth could be revealed. Michael studied the photograph more carefully. The car was identical to his father's restoration, down to the distinctive paint scheme and sponsor decals. This is the same car that's been in my father's garage for 20 years. Alessandro Romano's lost masterpiece, the only surviving example of technology that was 50 years ahead of its time. Dr. Vasquez leaned forward. Your father spent 2 decades not just restoring that car, but perfecting it, according to Alessandro's original vision. He was preparing for the day when the truth could finally be told. What happened to Romano? He disappeared. Officially, he left racing and returned to Italy. Unofficially, he was either killed or forced into permanent hiding. The people who stole his technology couldn't afford to let him develop it again. Michael sat back, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he'd inherited. So this isn't just about a valuable race car. It's about proving that Alessandro Romano was erased from racing history. It's about justice, Dr. Vasquez said simply. Alessandro deserved recognition for his innovations. The racing world deserves to know how progress was deliberately suppressed for corporate interests, and your father deserved to see his friend vindicated. She reached into her purse and pulled out a thick folder. These are copies of documents I've gathered over the years. Technical specifications, correspondence, even some of the original blueprints that Alessandro managed to hide before the theft. I've been waiting 40 years for someone to have the courage to bring this story to light. Why didn't you do it yourself? Because I didn't have the car. Without the physical proof, this would just be another racing conspiracy theory. But with Alessandro's prototype and all the supporting documentation, we can prove everything. Dr. Vasquez handed him the folder. The question is, are you willing to finish what your father started? Michael accepted the folder, feeling its weight as both physical object and moral obligation. What would that involve? First, we need to verify that the car in your garage is actually Alessandro's prototype. If the hidden compartment contains what I think it does, we'll have everything we need. Then we present the evidence publicly, probably at a major racing event where it can't be ignored or suppressed. And if the same people who silenced Romano are still around. Dr. Vasquez smiled grimly. Then we'd better be very careful about how we proceed. But Michael, those people are 50 years older now, if they're still alive at all. The racing world has changed dramatically since 1974. The truth has a better chance now than it ever has before. Michael left the cafe with Dr. Vasquez's folder and a commitment to meet again in 3 days. She wanted to examine the car personally to verify that it was indeed Alessandro's prototype. If it was, they would begin the process of preparing a public revelation that would rewrite Formula One history. As he drove back to Millfield, Michael realized that his father's death had set in motion something that had been waiting 40 years to unfold. Jack Morrison hadn't just been a small-town mechanic with an expensive hobby. He'd been the guardian of one of racing's greatest secrets. Now that responsibility belonged to Michael, whether he felt ready for it or not. 3 days later, Dr. Elena Vasquez arrived at the Morrison family home, driving a rental car filled with testing equipment. Michael had told Sarah that a racing historian wanted to examine their father's car for a documentary about amateur restorations. The lie came easily now, though it left him feeling guilty about deceiving his sister. "This is remarkable," Dr. Vasquez said as Michael led her into the garage. She approached the race car with the reverence of a pilgrim entering a sacred space. "The restoration is absolutely perfect. Your father was more than a talented mechanic, he was an artist." She spent an hour examining every detail of the car's exterior, taking measurements and photographs with scientific precision. When she asked to see the hidden compartment, Michael demonstrated the seat removal process he'd discovered days earlier. Dr. Vasquez studied the letters and medallion with a magnifying glass, occasionally making small sounds of recognition or surprise. "These are definitely Alessandro's letters," she confirmed. "I recognize his handwriting from documents I saw in 1974, and this medallion." She held the gold disc up to the light. "This is absolutely authentic. I helped design the engraving pattern." "You helped design it?" "I was working as a technical consultant when Alessandro won the Italian Formula 2 championship in 1973. This was his prize, though it was never officially presented because of political complications with the Racing Federation. Alessandro kept it as proof of his legitimate racing credentials. Dr. Vasquez returned the medallion to Michael and pulled out a folder of her own. "Now, I want to show you something that will help you understand the full scope of what your father was protecting." She spread several large technical drawings across Jack's workbench, detailed blueprints showing engine configurations, aerodynamic profiles, and suspension systems that looked incredibly advanced even by modern standards. "These are photocopies of Alessandro's original designs," she explained. "I managed to save them before the theft by making copies for my own research. Look at this fuel injection system. It's essentially identical to what Formula One teams started using in the 1980s. And this aerodynamic package wouldn't become standard until the 1990s. Michael studied the blueprints carefully. How was Romano so far ahead of everyone else? Pure genius, combined with an unconventional background. While other engineers were trained in traditional automotive principles, Alessandro came from a family of precision clockmakers. He understood mechanical systems at a level that most racing engineers never achieved. Plus, he wasn't constrained by industry assumptions about what was possible. Dr. Vasquez pointed to a series of calculations in the margins of the blueprints. These performance projections suggested that Alessandro's car would have been 3 to 4 seconds per lap faster than anything else on the grid. In Formula One, that's an enormous advantage, enough to guarantee championship victories for years. No wonder someone wanted to steal the technology. The theft wasn't random industrial espionage. It was a coordinated effort to prevent Alessandro from revolutionizing the sport. Dr. Vasquez's voice carried decades of suppressed anger. "I've spent 40 years researching what happened, and I'm convinced it was orchestrated by a consortium of established manufacturers who couldn't afford to become obsolete." She pulled out another document, a newspaper clipping from an Italian racing publication dated March 1974. The headline, which she translated, read, "Promising young driver leaves racing after family emergency." This was the official story. Alessandro supposedly returned to Italy to help with his family's clockmaking business. But I investigated, there was no family emergency. The clockmaking shop had been sold 6 months earlier. Alessandro had simply vanished. Michael felt a chill as the implications became clear. You think he was killed? I think he was given a choice. Disappear permanently or face consequences that would extend to his family. Remember, this was 1974. Formula One was a much smaller, more tightly controlled world than it is today. A few powerful people could effectively erase someone from the sport's history. Dr. Vasquez gathered the blueprints and returned them to her folder. But Alessandro was cleverer than his enemies realized. Before disappearing, he entrusted the physical proof, the car, and supporting documents to the one person he knew would protect them. Your father was the perfect guardian, unknown to the racing establishment, living in a small American town where no one would think to look, with the mechanical skills to maintain the car properly. Alessandro chose brilliantly. They spent the rest of the afternoon conducting technical tests on the race car. Dr. Vasquez used specialized equipment to verify that various components matched the specifications in Alessandro's blueprints. Each test confirmed what she'd suspected: this was indeed the original prototype, maintained in perfect condition for 5 decades. There's one more test I need to perform, she said, as the afternoon shadows grew long. According to my records, Alessandro incorporated a unique identifier into the engine block, a serial number that would prove this car's authenticity beyond any doubt. They spent an hour with flashlights and mirrors, searching the engine compartment for the identifying mark. Finally, on a surface visible only from a specific angle, Dr. Vasquez found what she was looking for: a series of numbers and letters etched into the metal with clockmaker's precision. AR-74-1, she read aloud. Alessandro Romano, 1974, prototype number 1. This is it, Michael. This is the smoking gun that proves everything. As they cleaned up their equipment, Michael found himself looking at the race car with new eyes. It wasn't just a beautiful machine or even a valuable antique. It was evidence of one of racing's greatest injustices. Hidden in his father's garage was proof that technological progress had been deliberately suppressed, that a brilliant innovator had been erased from history. What happens now? He asked. Now we have a choice, Dr. Vasquez replied. We can keep this secret, sell the car to a private collector, and let Alessandro's story remain buried. Or we can go public with evidence that will force the racing world to acknowledge what really happened in 1974. What would going public involve? A carefully orchestrated revelation. We'd need to present the evidence at a venue where it couldn't be ignored, probably the Monaco Grand Prix or another major Formula One event. We'd invite journalists, racing historians, and current team principals. Make it impossible for the story to be suppressed again. Michael considered the implications. That would make us targets for anyone who still has an interest in keeping this quiet. Possibly, but the racing world has changed enormously since 1974. The sport is much more international now, with stronger governance and media oversight. It would be much harder to silence inconvenient truths the way they could 50 years ago. Dr. Vasquez paused at the garage door, studying Michael's expression. I won't pressure you into anything. This decision has to be yours. But I want you to understand what your father was hoping for when he spent 20 years preparing this car. What do you mean? Jack knew he was getting older. He knew that someday he wouldn't be able to continue as the car's guardian. All those years of meticulous restoration weren't just about preserving Alessandro's work. They were about preparing for the day when the truth could finally be revealed. She handed Michael a business card. Take some time to think about it. When you're ready to decide, call me. But remember, this isn't just about honoring your father's memory. It's about justice for Alessandro Romano and truth for the racing world. After Dr. Vasquez left, Michael sat alone in the garage with the race car and his thoughts. The machine that had once embarrassed him as a teenager now represented something far more significant: a test of his own character and values. His father had carried this burden for 20 years without recognition or reward, motivated only by loyalty to a friend and commitment to eventual justice. Jack Morrison had been a hero in the truest sense, protecting something precious until the world was ready to receive it. The question was whether Michael had inherited not just his father's secret, but also his courage. As he turned off the garage lights and locked the door, Michael realized that his perspective on everything had fundamentally shifted. 3 days ago, he'd seen Jack's garage as a monument to wasted dreams. Now he understood it was a sanctuary where one of racing's most important stories had been carefully preserved, waiting for someone brave enough to tell it. Tomorrow, he would have to decide whether that someone was him. The following morning, Michael found himself standing in front of Millfield First National Bank, holding a small brass key that had been hidden in the back of his father's desk drawer. Sarah had discovered it while sorting through Jack's personal papers, attached to a note written in their father's careful handwriting. For Michael, when he's ready to understand. The key was different from the others on Jack's ring newer, with a distinctive shape that suggested it belonged to a safe deposit box rather than a door or cabinet. The note had included a box number, 247. "I still think this is a waste of time," Sarah said as they approached the bank's entrance. "Dad barely had enough money for groceries. What could he possibly have in a safe deposit box?" Michael had spent a sleepless night wrestling with whether to tell Sarah about Dr. Vasquez's visit and the growing evidence about Alessandro Romano. Part of him wanted to share the burden, but another part recognized that knowledge of the secret would put Sarah in potential danger. For now, he decided to proceed alone. Inside the bank, a friendly woman named Mrs. Patterson led them to the safe deposit vault. She'd known their father for years, she explained, and had been saddened to hear of his passing. Jack had rented the box for over 20 years, always paying his annual fee promptly in cash. "Your father was very particular about this box, Mrs. Patterson mentioned as she retrieved it from the vault. He visited every few months, always alone, always very serious about it. Said it contained important family documents." The box was larger than Michael had expected, about the size of a briefcase. Mrs. Patterson left them alone in a private viewing room, and Michael used the brass key to open the metal container. Inside, organized with the same meticulous care Jack had shown in his garage, were dozens of documents that painted a picture of a man leading a secret double life. Birth certificates and passports, not just Jack's, but several others with different names and Jack's photograph. Bank account statements from institutions in Switzerland and Monaco showing substantial deposits dating back to the 1970s. And most shocking of all, a leather portfolio containing what appeared to be official racing credentials and technical certifications from European motorsport organizations. "My God," Sarah whispered, picking up one of the passports. "Dad had multiple identities?" Michael studied the racing credentials more carefully. They identified Jack Morrison as a certified Formula One mechanic and technical specialist, qualified to work on Grand Prix cars in international competition. The dates showed he'd earned these certifications in the early 1970s, years before Michael was born. He wasn't just a small-town garage owner, Michael said slowly. He was a professional racing mechanic. "Look at these work permits: Monaco, Italy, Germany, Britain. Dad worked on the European racing circuit." Sarah held up a bank statement showing a balance that made her gasp. "Michael, there's over $200,000 in this Swiss account. Where did Dad get this kind of money?" At the bottom of the box, Michael found a manila envelope marked "For my son" in Jack's handwriting. Inside was a letter dated just 2 months before Jack's death, along with several photographs that showed a younger Jack working in European racing paddocks. The letter was longer and more detailed than anything Jack had ever written to his family. "My dear Michael, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've begun to discover the truth about my life before you were born. I know this must be confusing and probably upsetting. I never wanted to deceive you or Sarah, but circumstances required absolute secrecy for all our safety. In the early 1970s, I was not just a mechanic but a specialist in advanced racing technology. I worked for several European teams and developed a reputation for being able to extract maximum performance from any engine. This work brought me into contact with Alessandro Romano, a brilliant driver and engineer who became my closest friend. Alessandro was developing technology that would have revolutionized motorsport, but powerful interests conspired to steal his work and eliminate him from the sport. When Alessandro realized the danger, he asked me to become guardian of his most important creation, the prototype car you found in our garage. I accepted this responsibility because I believed in Alessandro's vision and because I owed him my life. During a racing accident in Monaco in 1973, Alessandro risked his own safety to pull me from a burning car. Without his courage, I would never have survived to meet your mother or have the privilege of being your father. The money in the Swiss account comes from Alessandro. Over the years, he has continued to support the car's maintenance and my family's welfare from his hiding place. He insisted that my guardianship should not be a financial burden, and he wanted to ensure that you and Sarah would have security even if something happened to me. I know you've always seen the race car as evidence of my foolish dreams, but I hope you now understand that it represents something far more important: loyalty, justice, and the belief that truth will eventually prevail over corruption. Alessandro is still alive, Michael. He has been waiting 50 years for the right moment to reclaim his legacy. I believe that moment may come during your lifetime, and I hope you will have the courage to help him achieve the recognition he deserves. The car contains everything needed to prove Alessandro's story. Dr. Elena Vasquez, whom you may have already met, has additional documentation that will support your efforts. Together, you can finally bring this injustice to light. I'm sorry for keeping these secrets from you, but I hope you understand that I was protecting both you and something precious that the world wasn't ready to receive. Now perhaps it is. All my love and faith in your character, Dad. Michael read the letter twice, his emotions cycling through shock, anger, sadness, and finally, a deep sense of pride in his father's integrity. Jack Morrison had lived a double life, not from selfishness, but from honor, protecting both his family and his friend's legacy with equal dedication. Sarah was studying the photographs, her expression shifting from confusion to amazement. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a picture that showed Jack standing beside a Formula One car with several other mechanics. "Dad looks so young, so confident. I've never seen him like this." "He was protecting us," Michael said, understanding finally settling over him like a warm blanket. "All those years we thought he was wasting money on a hopeless dream. He was actually fulfilling the most important commitment of his life." They spent another hour examining the documents, each revelation adding depth to their understanding of Jack's secret existence. The man they'd known as a simple, small-town mechanic had been a guardian of one of racing's greatest secrets, trusted with technology worth millions and a friendship that had endured for 5 decades. As they prepared to leave the bank, Sarah turned to Michael with tears in her eyes. "I feel terrible about all the things I said about Dad and that car. I thought he was being selfish and irresponsible, but he was actually being heroic." "We both misunderstood," Michael replied, "but now we have a chance to honor what he was really doing all those years." Walking back to their car, Michael realized that his father's death had been not an ending but a transition. Jack Morrison had spent 20 years preparing for this moment, ensuring that his son would have everything needed to complete Alessandro Romano's story. The question was no longer whether Michael had the courage to reveal the truth, but whether he was worthy of the trust his father had placed in him. Jack Morrison had been a hero in secret for 2 decades. Now it was Michael's turn to be a hero in public. That evening, Michael called Dr. Vasquez and arranged another meeting. It was time to begin planning the revelation that would restore Alessandro Romano to racing history and vindicate his father's lifetime of quiet sacrifice. The small-town mechanic's son was ready to change the world. 2 weeks later, Michael sat in Dr. Vasquez's university office, surrounded by the accumulated evidence of 50 years of injustice. The room looked like a war room, with photographs, documents, and technical drawings covering every available surface. Sarah had returned to Minneapolis, finally understanding their father's true legacy, but leaving Michael to decide how to proceed with the revelation. Dr. Vasquez had been working around the clock since their last meeting, reaching out to contacts throughout the racing world and gathering additional evidence. What she'd discovered was both encouraging and terrifying. "The good news," she said, pointing to a stack of documents, "is that we have more support than I expected. Several prominent racing journalists have been researching the 1974 incident independently. They're eager to help tell Alessandro's story once we're ready to go public. And the bad news? The bad news is that some very powerful people are still invested in keeping this quiet." Dr. Vasquez handed him a newspaper clipping from the previous week. "Look at this." The article was about a vintage racing collection that had been mysteriously burgled, with thieves targeting only documents and photographs from the 1970s. Nothing valuable was stolen. Jewelry, expensive watches, and even cash were left untouched. Only historical racing materials had been taken. "This is the third such incident in the past month," Dr. Vasquez explained. "Someone is systematically eliminating evidence related to the 1974 scandal. They know we're getting close to a revelation, and they're trying to destroy anything that might corroborate our story." Michael studied the article more carefully. "How would they know what we're doing?" "Word travels fast in the racing community. I've been discreet, but not invisible. People talk, connections get made, and suddenly the wrong people start paying attention." "Doctor," Vasquez moved to her office window and peered through the blinds. "I've noticed the same car parked across the street for 3 days now. Different drivers, but the same license plate." A chill ran down Michael's spine. "You think we're being watched?" "I think we need to accelerate our timeline. The longer we wait, the more evidence disappears, and the more dangerous this becomes." She returned to her desk and pulled out a thick folder. "That's why I've been working on this." The folder contained what appeared to be a complete presentation: photographs, technical analyses, historical documents, and a detailed timeline of events. Everything needed to present Alessandro Romano's story to the world in a way that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. "I've arranged for us to present this at the Historic Grand Prix Association's annual conference next month," Dr. Vasquez continued. "It's the perfect venue: racing historians, journalists, former drivers, and current team representatives all in one place. The story will reach the right people immediately." Michael flipped through the presentation materials, impressed by the thoroughness and professionalism of Dr. Vasquez's work. But one element was conspicuously missing. "Where's the final piece? Romano's testament?" Dr. Vasquez smiled mysteriously. "I was hoping you'd ask about that. According to your father's notes, there should be one more document hidden in the car, Alessandro's final testament, explaining everything in his own words. Have you found it yet?" "I thought the letters were his testament. Those were communications with your father. The testament is something different, a complete account of what happened, written specifically for the day when his story could be told publicly. Your father's notebook mentions it several times, but always cryptically." Michael tried to remember every detail of his searches through the car and garage. "I've found the hidden compartment under the seat, but I've examined every inch of that car. Where else could something be hidden? Alessandro was a clockmaker's son. He understood precision mechanisms and hidden compartments better than anyone. If I were hiding something in a race car for 50 years, I'd put it somewhere that only someone with specific knowledge could find it." That evening, Michael returned to the garage with renewed purpose. If Alessandro Romano had hidden a final testament in the race car, Michael was determined to find it. He began by re-examining every component he'd already searched, looking for anything he might have missed. The search proved frustrating. After 3 hours of careful inspection, he'd found nothing new. The car appeared to hold no more secrets than those he'd already discovered. But as he prepared to give up for the night, his eye caught something unusual about the steering wheel. Most of the car's components showed the wear and patina of age, but the steering wheel looked almost new. Michael examined it more closely and realized that while it appeared original, it had been expertly refinished. The leather wrapping was too perfect, the stitching too precise for something that had aged naturally for 50 years. Working carefully, Michael discovered that the steering wheel could be removed with a special tool. Once separated from the steering column, he found that the wheel's center hub was heavier than it should have been. The hub appeared solid, but when Michael tapped it gently, he heard a hollow sound. After 20 minutes of careful examination, he found a nearly invisible seam around the hub's circumference. With gentle pressure and some creative prying, the hub split into 2 pieces, revealing a waterproof compartment containing a single document wrapped in oiled cloth. The document was typewritten on expensive paper, with Alessandro Romano's signature and seal at the bottom. It was dated December 15, 1974, just days before Romano's disappearance from the racing world. Michael read the testament by flashlight, his excitement growing with each paragraph. This wasn't just a personal account, but a legal document that named specific individuals, companies, and organizations involved in the theft of Romano's technology. It provided dates, locations, and methods used to steal and suppress revolutionary racing innovations. More importantly, it contained detailed technical specifications that proved Romano's designs were decades ahead of their time. The document read like a roadmap for recreating technology that wouldn't become standard in Formula One until the 1990s and 2000s. But the most stunning revelation came in the final paragraphs. Alessandro Romano wasn't just a victim of corporate espionage, he was the true inventor of innovations that had made other people millions of dollars. Fuel injection systems, aerodynamic principles, and electronic management technologies that were later developed by major manufacturers had actually been stolen from Romano's original research. The racing world has spent 50 years building on foundations stolen from my work. Romano had written, "When this testament is finally revealed, it will not only vindicate my legacy, but expose the systematic theft that has shaped modern motorsport." Michael sat back in amazement. This document wouldn't just restore Alessandro Romano to racing history, it would rewrite that history entirely. Some of the sport's most celebrated technological advances would be revealed as stolen innovations, and several prominent figures would be exposed as frauds. No wonder someone was willing to commit burglary and possibly worse to keep this secret buried. Michael carefully rewrapped the testament and returned it to its hiding place in the steering wheel hub. Tomorrow, he would call Dr. Vasquez and share this final piece of the puzzle. Then they would begin the process of planning a revelation that would shake the racing world to its foundations. As he locked the garage and walked back to the house, Michael reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with his father's death. 3 weeks ago, he'd been a successful consultant with no interest in racing or family history. Now he was the guardian of secrets that could topple empires and restore justice to one of the sport's greatest innovators. His father had spent 20 years preparing for this moment, maintaining both the car and the evidence with perfect precision. Jack Morrison had been more than a small-town mechanic. He'd been a keeper of truth, waiting patiently for the day when that truth could finally see light. Now that day was approaching, and Michael intended to ensure his father's faith hadn't been misplaced. The quiet mechanic's son was about to become the voice of racing's greatest scandal. Michael was driving to Dr. Vasquez's office the next morning when his phone rang. The caller ID showed an international number he didn't recognize, but something compelled him to answer. Michael Morrison. The voice was accented Italian, perhaps, and carried the weight of advanced years. Yes. Who is this? My name is Alessandro Romano. I believe you have been looking for me. Michael nearly drove off the road. He pulled into a gas station parking lot, his hands shaking as he gripped the phone. That's impossible. Alessandro Romano disappeared 50 years ago. I disappeared from racing 50 years ago, the voice corrected gently. I have been very much alive, waiting for the day when it would be safe to reclaim my legacy. Your father's death has accelerated that timeline. How do I know you're really? In your father's garage, there is a red and gold Formula One car with my championship medallion hidden beneath the driver's seat. The steering wheel contains my final testament, dated December 15, 1974. Your father has maintained the car perfectly, following specifications I provided through intermediaries over the years. Michael sat in stunned silence. Only 3 people knew about the testament in the steering wheel: himself, Dr. Vasquez, and whoever had hidden it there originally. Where are you? Michael asked. Closer than you might expect. I have been monitoring the situation since Elena began her research. When it became clear that the truth was finally going to emerge, I decided to reveal myself. Dr. Vasquez knows you're alive? Elena has suspected for years, but this is the first time I've contacted anyone directly since 1974. The people who stole my technology are old or dead now. The racing world has changed. It's finally safe to tell our story. Romano's voice carried a mixture of sadness and determination. I need to meet with you, Michael. There are things about your father's death that you need to understand. What do you mean? Jack's heart attack wasn't natural. He was murdered. The words hit Michael like a physical blow. That's impossible, the doctors said. The doctors saw what they expected to see: an aging man with heart problems succumbing to natural causes. But I have evidence that suggests otherwise. Evidence that ties his death to recent efforts to locate and destroy proof of the 1974 theft. Michael's mind raced through the implications. You're saying someone killed my father to prevent him from revealing your story. I'm saying that as word of Elena's research spread through the racing community, certain people became concerned that their 50-year-old secret was about to be exposed. Your father was the most obvious target because he possessed the physical evidence. Romano paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. Meet me tonight at the Riverside Cemetery, near your mother's grave. Come alone, and bring Elena if you trust her. It's time you learned the complete truth about what your father died protecting. The line went dead, leaving Michael staring at his phone in the gas station parking lot. His father had been murdered. The man whose death had seemed like a natural end to a quiet life had actually been killed to protect a 50-year-old conspiracy. Michael called Dr. Vasquez immediately, his voice shaking as he relayed Romano's contact and accusations. She listened without interruption, then was silent for a long moment. I've wondered about the timing, she admitted finally. Jack's death came just as we were making significant progress on gathering evidence. It seemed coincidental. Romano wants to meet us tonight at Riverside Cemetery. Michael, this could be dangerous. If Jack was murdered, then we're dealing with people who are willing to kill to protect their secret. All the more reason to get the truth out as quickly as possible. Michael replied. If we wait, we might end up like my father. That evening, Michael and Dr. Vasquez approached Riverside Cemetery as the sun was setting. The graveyard was old and peaceful, with towering oak trees casting long shadows across weathered headstones. Michael's mother had been buried here 15 years earlier, in a plot that Jack had visited every week until his death. They found Alessandro Romano standing beside Margaret Morrison's grave, a tall figure in an expensive coat who looked remarkably well preserved for a man in his 80s. His hair was white but thick, his posture erect, and his eyes sharp with intelligence and sorrow. "Michael," he said, extending his hand, "you have your father's face, but your mother's eyes. Jack was very proud of you, even though he couldn't tell you why." "Elena." Romano nodded to Dr. Vasquez. "Thank you for keeping faith with our cause all these years." "Alessandro." Dr. Vasquez embraced the older man. "I was beginning to think I'd never see you again." Romano gestured toward a nearby bench. "Sit. What I have to tell you will be difficult to hear." For the next hour, Alessandro Romano told them a story that reframed everything Michael thought he knew about his father's life and death. Romano hadn't simply disappeared in 1974. He'd been forced into a witness protection program after providing evidence to international authorities about massive corruption in Formula One racing. The theft of his technology hadn't been an isolated incident, but part of a systematic effort by a cartel of manufacturers to control racing innovation. Romano's engines would have made their technology obsolete overnight, costing them millions in research investments and future profits. "They gave me a choice," Romano explained. "Disappear completely, or watch my family suffer the consequences. I chose exile, but I made sure the evidence was preserved through Jack's guardianship." "What evidence?" Michael asked. Romano pulled out a thick envelope containing photographs that made Michael's blood run cold. The pictures showed his father meeting with unknown men in various locations around Millfield, recent photographs, taken within the last few months of Jack's life. "Your father was being watched and threatened," Romano continued. "These people wanted him to turn over the car and all supporting evidence." Jack refused, knowing that without physical proof, my story would never be believed. Dr. Vasquez studied the photographs carefully. "How do you know about his death being murder?" "Because I've been monitoring the situation through contacts in law enforcement." Jack's medical examiner found traces of a rare compound in his blood, something that could trigger a heart attack in someone with existing heart problems. The compound was initially missed because it mimics natural heart failure. Romano handed Michael another document. "This is a copy of the confidential autopsy report. Your father was injected with a substance that would kill him while leaving minimal forensic evidence." Michael read the report with growing horror. His father hadn't died peacefully in his sleep. He'd been murdered by people who were willing to kill an innocent man to protect their 50-year-old secret. Why didn't the police investigate this? Because the local authorities weren't looking for murder. Small-town police departments don't typically suspect exotic poisons when an elderly man with heart problems dies at home. The compound would only be detected through specific tests that weren't part of the standard autopsy. Romano stood and walked to Margaret Morrison's headstone, running his fingers over the engraved name. "Jack loved your mother deeply. He accepted my burden partly out of friendship, but mostly because the money I provided helped pay for her cancer treatments. Your father was a hero twice over, once for protecting my legacy, and once for sacrificing his own dreams to care for the woman he loved." Michael felt tears building in his eyes. Everything he'd believed about his family's financial struggles, his father's priorities, and their relationship had been based on incomplete information. Jack Morrison hadn't been a dreamer, neglecting his responsibilities. He'd been a guardian fulfilling the most important commitment of his life. "What happens now?" Dr. Vasquez asked. "Now we finish what Jack died protecting," Romano replied. "We present the evidence publicly and let the world judge who the real heroes and villains have been. But we must be very careful. The people who killed Jack won't hesitate to kill again if they feel threatened." Romano handed Michael a key. "This opens a storage unit in Chicago that contains additional evidence, photographs, documents, and technical specifications that support everything in my testament. Combined with the car and Elena's research, we have enough proof to rewrite racing history. And we have enough proof to bring Jack's killers to justice," Michael added grimly. As they prepared to leave the cemetery, Romano placed a hand on Michael's shoulder. "Your father spent 20 years preparing for this moment. He believed you would have the courage to finish what we started. I hope his faith wasn't misplaced." Michael looked back at his mother's grave. where his father had spent so many quiet hours, probably wrestling with the weight of secrets he couldn't share. Jack Morrison had been a better man than his son had ever realized, and he'd died protecting something that was now Michael's responsibility. "It wasn't misplaced," Michael said firmly. "We're going to tell your story, expose the truth about my father's murder, and make sure justice is finally served." Romano smiled for the first time since their meeting began. Then, perhaps, 50 years of exile will finally come to an end. As they walked away from the cemetery, Michael realized that his father's death had been not just a personal tragedy, but a call to action. Jack Morrison had died protecting the truth, and now it was Michael's turn to make sure that truth saw the light of day. The quiet mechanic's son was about to become a very loud voice for justice. The historic Grand Prix Association's annual conference was scheduled to begin in 10 days at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and Michael found himself working 18-hour days to prepare for what would either be the greatest vindication in racing history or a spectacular failure that would dishonor his father's memory. Romano had provided the storage unit key as promised, leading to a treasure trove of evidence that exceeded even Dr. Vasquez's expectations. 50 years of hidden documentation, including photographs of the original theft, correspondence between the perpetrators, and technical analyses, proving that Romano's stolen innovations had formed the foundation of modern Formula One technology. But gathering evidence was only part of the challenge. They also had to prepare the most important element of their presentation, the race car itself. Romano had insisted that the car be restored to full running condition for the conference. "People can dismiss documents and photographs," he'd explained. "But when they hear my engine running exactly as I designed it in 1974, when they see technology that was decades ahead of its time, they won't be able to deny the truth." This was where Michael discovered talents he'd inherited from his father, but never recognized. Working alongside Romano and Tony Castellano, Jack's old mechanic friend, who'd agreed to help, once he learned the full story, Michael found himself understanding the race car's complex systems with surprising intuition. "You've got your father's touch," Tony observed as Michael adjusted the engine's timing with precision that surprised even himself. "Jack always said mechanical skill was something you felt in your hands, not learned from books." Romano watched Michael work with obvious emotion. "Jack would be proud to see you completing his restoration. He spent 20 years preparing this car for one moment, the day when it would run again and prove our story to the world." The engine was a masterpiece of 1970s innovation that still impressed modern engineers. Romano's fuel injection system was more sophisticated than anything used in Formula One until the 1980s. His aerodynamic package incorporated principles that wouldn't become standard until the 1990s. And his electronic management system was decades ahead of its time. The performance advantages would have been enormous, Dr. Vasquez noted as she documented the car's technical specifications. Conservative estimates suggest this car would have been 3 to 4 seconds per lap faster than anything else on the grid in 1974. "Which is exactly why it had to be stolen," Romano replied bitterly. "I wasn't just threatening to win races, I was threatening to make every other team's technology obsolete overnight." As the conference approached, Michael found himself bonding with Romano in ways that reminded him of the relationship he'd never had with his own father. Romano was patient, knowledgeable, and deeply committed to sharing his expertise. Their conversations over engine adjustments and suspension settings often drifted into discussions of engineering philosophy, racing history, and the nature of innovation. "Your father understood something that most people never grasp," Romano said one evening as they finished work on the car's electronics. "True innovation isn't about being smarter than everyone else. It's about being willing to see possibilities that others dismiss as impossible. Is that why you trusted him with your life's work?" "I trusted him because he saved my life, literally. but I entrusted him with my legacy because I recognized a kindred spirit. Jack Morrison was an innovator, disguised as a small-town mechanic. 3 days before the conference, their preparations were interrupted by an event that reminded them of the ongoing danger. Michael arrived at the garage to find the building's rear window smashed and clear evidence that someone had attempted to break in. The intruder hadn't succeeded in stealing anything. Romano had insisted on installing sophisticated security systems, but the message was clear. They were still being watched. "We need to accelerate our timeline," Romano decided. "The closer we get to the revelation, the more desperate our enemies become." Dr. Vasquez had been receiving similar pressure. Her office had been burglarized twice in the past week, and she'd noticed the same surveillance vehicles that had worried her earlier. "We should consider going to the police with evidence of your father's murder," she suggested. "After the conference," Michael replied. "If we go to the police now, we risk having all our evidence tied up in a criminal investigation just when we need it most. Let's expose the truth publicly first, then pursue criminal charges." Romano agreed. "Once our story is public, it will be much harder for anyone to silence us or suppress the evidence. The best protection we have is transparency." The night before leaving for Indianapolis, Michael sat alone in the garage with his father's race car, now restored to perfect running condition. The machine that had once embarrassed him as a symbol of wasted dreams had become something magnificent, a testament to human innovation and the power of friendship across decades. He thought about his father's secret life, the burden of protecting Romano's legacy, and the courage it must have taken to maintain that commitment for 20 years without recognition or reward. Jack Morrison had been a hero in the truest sense, sacrificing his own dreams to preserve something precious for future generations. The restored engine was Romano's final masterpiece, but it was also Jack Morrison's. Every component had been rebuilt with love and precision, every system perfected through decades of patient work. Tomorrow, when the engine fired to life in front of racing's most important figures, it would be both men's voices speaking to the world. Michael had invited Sarah to attend the conference, finally sharing the complete truth about their father's life and death. She would arrive in Indianapolis the next morning, ready to see their father receive the recognition he'd always deserved. "I can't believe I spent so many years resenting Dad for working on that car," she'd said when Michael told her the full story. "He was protecting something incredible, and I was too blind to see it." "We were both blind," Michael had replied. "But Dad understood that someday we'd see clearly. He was patient enough to wait for that day." As Michael prepared to cover the race car for transport to Indianapolis, he noticed his father's notebook sitting on the workbench. He'd read it dozens of times now, but tonight one particular entry caught his attention in a new way. "The car is more than a machine. It's proof that truth is stronger than lies, that innovation can't be suppressed forever, and that friendship transcends even death. When Michael finally understands what we've built here, he'll know that every sacrifice was worthwhile." Tomorrow, Michael would stand before an audience of racing's most important figures and tell a story that would change the sport's history. He would speak for his murdered father, his exiled friend, and all the other innovators whose work had been stolen or suppressed. The quiet mechanic's son was ready to make some noise. But first, he had one more task. Michael walked to his father's workbench and picked up the tools that had built something extraordinary. Tomorrow, he would use those same tools to complete his father's final restoration, not of a race car, but of justice itself. Jack Morrison's son was finally ready to make his father proud. The Indianapolis Motor Speedway Conference Center buzzed with the energy of racing's most important annual gathering. Hundreds of participants, former drivers, team principals, journalists, and historians had come from around the world to share stories and preserve the sport's heritage. None of them expected to witness the rewriting of Formula One history. Michael stood backstage, watching through a gap in the curtains as the audience took their seats. Sarah sat in the front row, her face a mixture of pride and nervousness. "Dr. Vasquez was making final adjustments to their presentation materials, while Romano waited calmly beside the covered race car they'd transported from Millfield. "Second thoughts?" Romano asked, noticing Michael's tension. "Just thinking about Dad. He should be here to see this." "He is here," Romano replied simply. "Every perfect component of that car carries his spirit. When we start the engine, Jack Morrison will speak to this audience as clearly as if he were standing at the podium." The conference moderator, a respected racing journalist named David Chen, approached their group. "Are you ready? I have to say, your preview materials are the most intriguing thing I've seen in 20 years of covering this sport." Michael nodded. "We're ready." Chen returned to the stage and addressed the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special presentation this afternoon. Mr. Michael Morrison, working with Dr. Elena Vasquez and a surprise guest, will be sharing evidence of what may be one of the most significant cover-ups in Formula One history." Michael walked onto the stage, his heart pounding but his purpose clear. Behind him, Romano and Dr. Vasquez wheeled the covered race car into position. "3 months ago," Michael began, his voice steady despite his nerves, "my father died quietly in our small town of Millfield. Jack Morrison was known as a simple garage owner who spent 20 years restoring what everyone called a worthless old race car. Today, I'm here to tell you that my father was actually a guardian of one of racing's greatest secrets." Michael gestured toward the covered car. "Beneath this canvas lies proof that Formula One history as we know it is built on a foundation of theft, conspiracy, and the systematic erasure of one man's revolutionary contributions to motorsport." A murmur of skepticism rippled through the audience. Michael had expected this reaction. Extraordinary claims required extraordinary evidence. "Before I reveal what my father protected for 5 decades, I want to introduce you to someone most of you have never heard of, but whose innovations have shaped every Formula One car built since 1974. Romano stepped forward, removing his hat and coat. Several older members of the audience leaned forward, something familiar about the tall figure sparking distant memories. "Ladies and gentlemen," Michael announced, "please welcome Alessandro Romano." The silence that followed was profound. Then, from the back of the auditorium, an elderly man stood up slowly. "My God," he said in accented English. "Alessandro? Alessandro Romano? But you're supposed to be dead." Romano smiled sadly. "Not dead, Giovanni, just exiled for 50 years. Dr. Vasquez stepped to the microphone. For those who don't recognize the name, Alessandro Romano was scheduled to debut in Formula One in 1974 with revolutionary technology that would have changed racing forever. Instead, his work was stolen, his identity erased from official records, and he was forced to disappear to protect his life. Michael pulled away the canvas covering, revealing the gleaming race car in all its restored glory. Gasps echoed through the audience as they saw the immaculate machine, its red and gold paint scheme brilliant under the stage lights. "This is Romano's prototype," Michael announced, "the only car ever built using technology that was decades ahead of its time. Technology that was stolen and later rediscovered by manufacturers who became legends for innovations they never actually created." Romano approached the microphone, his voice carrying the weight of 50 years of enforced silence. "In 1973, I developed fuel injection systems that wouldn't appear in Formula One until 1983. Aerodynamic principles that became standard in the 1990s. Electronic management systems that are only now being fully utilized." He gestured toward the race car. "This machine would have dominated Formula One for decades. Conservative estimates suggest it would have been 3 to 4 seconds per lap faster than anything else on the grid in 1974. "That's impossible," called out a voice from the audience, a representative from one of the major manufacturers. Dr. Vasquez activated a large screen behind the stage, displaying technical drawings and performance calculations. These are photocopies of Romano's original blueprints, dating from 1973. As you can see, the specifications are remarkably advanced for their time. She clicked to the next slide, showing a comparison chart. Here's where it gets interesting. These are the breakthrough innovations introduced by various manufacturers throughout the 1980s and 1990s. Notice the remarkable similarity to Romano's original designs. The audience studied the comparisons in stunned silence. The correlation was undeniable. Innovations that had defined decades of Formula One development were clearly based on Romano's stolen work. Michael stepped forward again. The night before Romano's scheduled debut, everything was stolen. Not just the car, but all technical drawings, research notes, and prototypes. The theft was so complete and professional that it had to be orchestrated by people with intimate knowledge of what they were taking. Romano's voice grew stronger as he continued his story. I was given a choice: disappear permanently or watch my family pay the price for my innovations. I chose exile, but I made sure the evidence survived through the guardianship of the one man I trusted completely, Jack Morrison. The screen displayed photographs of Jack working in European racing paddocks during the early 1970s. My father wasn't just a small-town mechanic, Michael explained. He was a certified Formula One specialist who had worked on championship-winning cars. When Romano needed someone to preserve his legacy, Jack Morrison was the perfect choice. Michael felt his voice strengthen as he spoke about his father's secret heroism. For 20 years, my father maintained this car in perfect condition, following Romano's specifications transmitted through intermediaries. He never sought recognition or reward. He simply honored his commitment to preserve the truth until the world was ready to hear it. The audience was completely silent now, absorbed in a story that was reframing everything they thought they knew about Formula One history. Romano approached the race car and began the starting sequence. Ladies and gentlemen, you're about to hear the sound of authentic 1970s innovation. This engine incorporates technology that was stolen and suppressed for 50 years. The engine turned over once, twice, then caught with a roar that filled the conference center. The sound was unlike anything in modern Formula One, deeper, more complex, with a rhythm that spoke of precision engineering from a different era. Romano climbed into the cockpit and revved the engine, the sound building to a crescendo that made several audience members cover their ears. When he shut it down, the silence that followed was profound. That, Romano announced, is the sound of justice finally being served. The questions began immediately, some skeptical, others supportive, but all urgent. David Chen struggled to maintain order as racing journalists, former drivers, and industry representatives all tried to speak at once. This is a serious accusation. Called out, a man Michael recognized as a retired team principal. You're essentially claiming that half a century of Formula One development was based on stolen technology. Romano climbed down from the race car, his dignity intact despite 50 years of exile. I'm not claiming it, I'm proving it. Every major innovation introduced in Formula One between 1980 and 2000 can be traced to blueprints stolen from my workshop in 1974. Dr. Vasquez activated the screen again, displaying a detailed timeline. We've documented the chain of custody for Romano's stolen technology. Within months of the theft, prototype systems began appearing at major manufacturers. Within years, those prototypes became the foundation for championship-winning cars. But where's the proof of the actual theft? Demanded a racing journalist. Michael stepped forward, his father's final lesson guiding his response. The proof is in the car itself. Hidden in the chassis is Romano's final testament, written just before his disappearance. It names names, provides dates, and details exactly how the theft was orchestrated. Romano retrieved the testament from the steering wheel hub, his movements careful and ceremonial. I wrote this in December 1974, knowing that I might not survive to tell the story personally. It's a complete account of how my life's work was stolen and my identity erased from racing history. He handed the document to David Chen, who read the first page aloud. The audience listened in stunned silence as Chen detailed accusations against specific individuals, some of whom had become legends in Formula One. This document alleges that Giovanni Toretti, founder of Toretti Racing Systems, built his empire on stolen Romano technology. Chen read, "It claims that the revolutionary fuel injection system that made Toretti famous was actually developed by Romano in 1973. An elderly man in the audience stood up, his face pale. "I am Giovanni Toretti," he said quietly, "and I can no longer live with this lie." The conference center fell completely silent. Toretti, now in his 80s, walked slowly toward the stage. "Alessandro, my old friend, I have spent 50 years hoping this day would never come, and 50 years hoping it would." Romano's expression softened as he recognized his former colleague. "Giovanni, I wondered if you were still alive." "Barely," Toretti replied, his voice heavy with decades of guilt. "The cancer is taking me, Alessandro. I have perhaps months to live. I cannot die with this secret." Toretti turned to address the audience, his confession transforming the presentation from historical investigation to real-time justice. "Everything they have told you is true. I was part of the conspiracy that stole Alessandro's work. We justified it by saying his technology was too advanced, too dangerous for the sport. But the truth was simpler. We were afraid of being made obsolete." The audience erupted in shocked conversation. David Chen struggled to restore order as Toretti continued his confession. "We told ourselves we were protecting Formula One from chaos, but we were protecting our investments, our reputations, our control over the sport's future." Toretti looked directly at Romano. "I have lived with this guilt every day since 1974. The success that made me wealthy and famous was built on betraying the most brilliant engineer I ever knew." Romano stepped down from the stage and embraced his former friend. "Giovanni, you were young. We all were. Fear makes people do terrible things." "But not you," Toretti replied. "You could have fought us, exposed us, destroyed us all. Instead, you disappeared to protect your family. You were the better man then, and you're the better man now." Michael watched this extraordinary reconciliation with amazement. His father's 20 years of patient guardianship had led to this moment, not just the restoration of Romano's legacy, but the redemption of one of his betrayers. Dr. Vasquez approached the microphone. "There's one more element to this story that you need to understand. Alessandro Romano didn't just disappear in 1974, he was murdered. And Jack Morrison, who spent 20 years protecting this secret, was murdered 3 months ago to prevent this revelation." The audience's shock deepened as Dr. Vasquez presented the evidence of both murders, the exotic compounds, the timing, the systematic efforts to eliminate anyone who could expose the truth. "The same people who stole Romano's technology have been killing to protect that secret for 50 years. She announced. "This isn't just about racing history. It's about ongoing criminal conspiracy and murder." Michael found his voice for the final revelation. "Before my father died, he left me a video message. He knew the danger was increasing, and he wanted to ensure that if something happened to him, I would understand why he'd spent his life protecting Alessandro's legacy." Michael activated a video player, and his father's face appeared on the conference screen. The audience watched in complete silence as Jack Morrison, recorded just weeks before his death, spoke directly to his son about honor, friendship, and the importance of preserving truth even at personal cost. "Michael," Jack's recorded voice said, "if you're watching this, then I'm gone, and the burden has passed to you. I need you to know that every sacrifice was worthwhile. Alessandro Romano deserved better than exile, and the racing world deserves better than a history built on lies. Finish what we started, son. Make them tell the truth. When the video ended, the conference center was completely silent. Then, slowly, someone began to applaud. Others joined, and within moments, the entire audience was on their feet, applauding not just for Romano's vindication, but for Jack Morrison's decades of quiet heroism. Michael looked out at the standing ovation and felt his father's presence as surely as if Jack were standing beside him. The small-town mechanic had finally received the recognition he deserved, and the racing world would never be the same. Romano took the microphone for his final statement. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have lived 50 years in exile, watching my innovations credited to others, seeing my legacy erased from history. Today, thanks to Jack Morrison's courage and his son's determination, that exile finally ends." He gestured toward the race car that had been hidden for 5 decades. This machine represents more than stolen technology. It represents the power of truth to survive, even the most determined efforts to suppress it. It represents friendship that transcends time and circumstance, and it represents the hope that justice, however delayed, will eventually prevail. Romano's voice strengthened as he delivered his final words. "I dedicate this revelation to Jack Morrison, who gave up his dreams to preserve mine. He was the greatest mechanic, the most loyal friend, and the finest man I ever knew. Today, his faith in justice has finally been vindicated." The applause was thunderous and sustained. Michael knew that everything had changed in the past hour for Romano, for Formula One history, and for his own understanding of his father's true legacy. Jack Morrison's son had finally made his father proud. 6 months later, Michael stood in his father's garage, but everything had changed. The space had been transformed from a secret sanctuary into a proper museum, with climate-controlled display cases showcasing Romano's original blueprints, Jack's restoration notes, and the correspondence that had sustained their friendship across 5 decades. The race car itself now occupied the place of honor, surrounded by explanatory panels that told the complete story of Alessandro Romano's innovations and Jack Morrison's guardianship. The International Racing Heritage Foundation had designated the garage as an official historic site, ensuring that future generations would understand both the technological significance and the human cost of the 1974 conspiracy. "It's perfect," Sarah said, adjusting one of the display cases. "Dad would love seeing his workshop turned into something that honors both his work and Alessandro's legacy." The revelations at the Indianapolis conference had triggered a cascade of changes throughout the racing world. Giovanni Toretti's public confession had opened floodgates of additional admissions, as other aging conspirators chose confession over carrying their guilt to the grave. A formal investigation by the International Automobile Federation had resulted in posthumous honors for Romano and significant changes to how technological innovations were documented and protected in motorsport. More importantly for Michael's peace of mind, the investigation had also led to arrests in connection with both Romano's attempted murder in 1974 and Jack Morrison's actual murder 3 months earlier. The conspiracy that had seemed powerful and untouchable had crumbled once the truth was exposed to public scrutiny. Romano had emerged from 50 years of exile to become one of racing's most respected elder statesmen. At 83, he was consulting with current Formula One teams on advanced technologies and serving as an advocate for innovation transparency. The International Racing Heritage Foundation had established the Romano Innovation Award, recognizing engineers who advanced motorsport technology through legitimate research and development. "Michael, there's someone here to see you," Tony Castellano called from the garage entrance. Michael looked up to see a young woman in her 20s, holding what appeared to be a technical portfolio. She was accompanied by an older man who looked vaguely familiar. "Mr. Morrison," the young woman said, extending her hand. "My name is Elena Romano. I'm Alessandro's granddaughter. Michael shook her hand, immediately recognizing the intelligent eyes and determined expression that had made her grandfather legendary. It's an honor to meet you. Your grandfather speaks of you often. He sent me here because I have something that belongs to your family, Elena continued. She opened her portfolio and pulled out a formal document with ornate calligraphy and official seals. This is a commission from the Italian government, she explained. They're posthumously inducting your father into the Order of Merit for his protection of Italian cultural heritage. Grandfather convinced them that preserving his innovations was equivalent to preserving a national treasure. Michael accepted the commission with trembling hands. The document, written in both Italian and English, formally recognized Jack Morrison as a hero who had sacrificed personal recognition to preserve invaluable technological heritage for future generations. There's more, the older man said, stepping forward. I'm Roberto Marchetti, curator of the Italian National Racing Museum. We're establishing a permanent exhibition about the Romano affair, and we'd like to borrow some of your father's materials for display in Rome. Sarah joined the conversation, her pride in their father's legacy evident. Dad would be amazed to know that his secret work was going to be displayed in a museum in Italy. Your father's restoration notes are masterpieces of mechanical documentation, Marchetti continued. They show not just technical skill, but genuine love for the craft. We want to make sure future mechanics understand that their work can be as much about preserving history as fixing machines. That evening, after the visitors had left and Sarah had returned to Minneapolis, Michael sat alone in the museum that had once been his father's secret workshop. Romano had sent him a bottle of Italian wine to commemorate the commission ceremony, along with a note. Jack would be proud that his son has become the guardian of more than just a race car. You're now the guardian of a story that will inspire mechanics and innovators for generations. Michael poured himself a glass of the wine and walked around the space, remembering his teenage years when he'd been embarrassed by his father's obsession with the worthless race car. Now that same car was the centerpiece of a story that had changed Formula One history and exposed one of motorsport's greatest injustices. The financial rewards had been substantial as well. The Romano technology patents, once properly attributed, had generated licensing fees that made Michael financially secure for life. More importantly, the Romano Innovation Foundation had been established with funds from manufacturers who wanted to demonstrate their commitment to legitimate technological development. But the real transformation had been personal. Michael had left his consulting business in Chicago and moved back to Millfield, using his inheritance to establish a technical training center for aspiring mechanics. The facility, housed in a new building adjacent to the museum, taught both traditional mechanical skills and advanced racing technology, ensuring that Jack Morrison's commitment to craftsmanship would inspire future generations. "Dad," Michael said quietly, raising his wineglass toward the race car, "I finally understand what you were trying to teach me all those years. It wasn't about the car itself, it was about the importance of keeping faith with something bigger than yourself." The garage was silent, except for the gentle hum of climate control systems protecting the artifacts within. But Michael could feel his father's presence as surely as if Jack were standing beside him, probably making one of his careful mechanical adjustments to ensure everything was perfect. 6 months ago, Michael had been a successful consultant with a strained relationship with his family's past. Tonight, he was the guardian of a story that had rewritten racing history, the keeper of a friendship that had transcended death, and the son of a man he finally understood was a hero in the truest sense. Tomorrow, the first class of students would begin their training at the Jack Morrison Technical Center. They would learn not just how to repair engines and adjust suspensions, but how to honor the craft that connected them to generations of mechanics who had kept the racing world running through skill, dedication, and quiet heroism. Romano's innovations had finally received their due recognition. The conspiracy that stole them had been exposed and punished. and Jack Morrison's name would be remembered alongside the greatest figures in racing history. But most importantly, a son had finally learned to see his father clearly not as the dreamer who had embarrassed him in childhood, but as the guardian who had preserved something precious until the world was ready to receive it. Michael finished his wine and turned off the museum lights, leaving the race car gleaming in the moonlight that streamed through the skylight Jack had installed 20 years earlier. Tomorrow would bring new students, new challenges, and new opportunities to honor the legacy that had been entrusted to him. Tonight, for the first time since his father's death, Michael Morrison slept peacefully, knowing that he had finally proven worthy of Jack Morrison's faith in him. The quiet mechanic's son had found his voice, and it was singing the same song of integrity and dedication that had guided his father through 20 years of secret heroism. Some dreams, Michael had learned, are worth a lifetime of patience.